Two people can earn the exact same salary. One of them will not stop talking about money. The other never brings it up, except once. That single moment is the entire difference between them. I watched this pattern for years before I understood what it actually was. It wasn't about income. It wasn't a spreadsheet, an app, or a New Year's resolution. It was a habit, so small most people walk right past it. And the strange part, it costs nothing to copy. Not more discipline. Not a bigger paycheck. One sentence, asked at one exact moment, right before money leaves their hands. Everyone in the room hears it happen. Almost nobody notices what it actually is. Here's the contradiction nobody talks about. Americans talk about money constantly, how expensive everything is, what a coworker makes, what a house down the street sold for. Constant noise. But the people actually building wealth quietly in the background, they say almost nothing. Except once. And that once is the tell. Think about the people in your life who talk about money the most. The ones who mention the vacation cost, the car payment, the size of the bonus. Loud about money. Often broke by month 28 of the year, if you could see behind the curtain. Now think about the quiet ones. The ones who never bring it up. Somehow they're the ones with the paid-off house. The ones who retire on schedule. The contradiction sits right there in plain sight, and almost nobody stops to ask why. I want to introduce you to Nathan. 44 years old, works in facilities management, drives a Honda that's 11 years old with a small dent in the rear bumper he's never bothered to fix. Nathan does not talk about money. Not at barbecues, not at work, not with extended family. For years I assumed that meant he wasn't thinking about it, until the one time I watched him actually spend. A coworker was selling a used kayak.
$60.
Nathan wanted it. He picked it up, looked at it for maybe 4 seconds, and asked one question out loud. Will I still be using this in 3 years? Or is this a 2-month thing? That's it. That's the whole sentence. Not can I afford it? Not is this a good deal? A completely different question, one about time, not price. He bought the kayak. He's still using it for years later. But that same week, someone offered him a slightly newer truck for $8,000 less than retail. Nathan said no in about 2 seconds. Same question, different answer. He already knew 3 years from now, he wouldn't care about the truck at all. Now here's Vivian. 57, a schoolteacher for 31 years, salary that topped out under $70,000 a year for most of her career. Vivian doesn't talk about money either. Not once in the 11 years I've known her. Except one afternoon, when a friend was agonizing over a $400 espresso machine. Vivian said one sentence, "Would you still be excited about this on a random Tuesday in 8 months?" Then she went back to grading papers. That's the pattern. Not a budget. Not a rule. One question, asked once, that filters everything downstream. And here's the part that should stop you. Vivian, on a teacher's salary, retired with just over $400,000 in savings. Not because she earned more. Because she asked that question every single time, and most purchases quietly failed the test before they ever reached her wallet. Let's do the actual math, because this is where it stops being a personality quirk and starts being real money. Say there's a purchase every single month that fails Vivian's question, something that feels exciting in the store and forgettable 8 months later. $200. Not extravagant. Just an average discretionary buy. $200 a month, redirected instead into an index fund earning the historical average of 10.5% a year. Over 20 years, that's not $48,000 sitting in cash. That's closer to $152,000 because of what compounding does to money that's never interrupted. Nobody explains it that way, though. It gets explained as make a budget or cut back on lattes, and the advice lands flat because it feels like restriction. But that's not what Nathan or Vivian are doing. They're not restricting anything. They're asking one question once before the money moves and letting the answer decide, instead of the moment deciding. Here's the part that actually explains the contradiction from earlier. The people who talk about money constantly are usually reacting to a purchase after the fact, justifying it, complaining about the bill, explaining why they deserved it. The talking happens after the decision, when it's too late to change anything. Nathan and Vivian do the opposite. The one sentence happens before the decision, when it can still change the outcome. That's the entire difference. Not how much they talk. When they talk. There's a version of this that shows up at every life stage, and it rarely gets named directly. 20-something, first real paycheck. The question sounds like, will this still matter to me in 3 years, aimed at whatever feels urgent right now. A car, a lease, a trip charged to a card. Mid-30s, a mortgage, and maybe kids. The same question aimed at a bigger kitchen renovation, a boat sitting in a driveway 11 months a year, a truck upgrade that has nothing to do with towing anything. 50s and 60s, closer to retirement. The question turns inward, aimed at whether staying in a 4-bedroom house still makes sense for 2 people, whether a lifestyle built for a career that's ending still fits a life that's beginning. Same question, every single stage. Different dollar amount. Different object. Identical filter. I should say, this isn't about never spending money. Nathan spent $60 on a kayak he still uses. Vivian's friend, after hearing the question, still bought the espresso machine. She just waited 3 weeks first and used it every single morning after that. The question isn't a wall. It's a pause. A very short one. For seconds, in Nathan's case. Long enough for the excitement to separate itself from the actual answer. Compare that to what most spending decisions actually look like. A screen, a price, a countdown timer, an only 3 left banner, designed specifically to prevent that 4-second pause from ever happening. The entire architecture of modern spending is built to skip the question, which means asking it even once, even quietly, puts you outside a system that was built assuming you wouldn't. Here's a number worth sitting with. If the average household redirected just one purchase a month, the one that would fail the 8-month test, into a retirement account instead, starting at age 30 and continuing to 65, at that same 10.5% historical return, the total isn't some abstract number. It's over $700,000. Not from a raise. Not from a second job. From one sentence, repeated monthly, for 35 years. Nobody sits down and calculates that number for themselves. It's not on any bank statement. It's not on any app notification. It only shows up if you go looking for it, which is exactly why almost nobody does. Go back to the friend who never talks about money. The one who's quiet at every dinner, every holiday, every group chat about splitting a bill. It never looked like wealth building. It looked like someone who just wasn't that into spending or wasn't that interesting to talk to about money. Reframe that same person now. The silence wasn't disinterest. It was the absence of a decision being made out loud, because the real decision already happened privately in 4 seconds before the money ever moved. The quiet was never emptiness. It was the sound of a question already answered. There's a third person worth mentioning because the pattern shows up in places that have nothing to do with kayaks or espresso machines. A co-worker of mine, mid-30s, was about to sign for a new car. Sticker price just over $50,000, payment landing somewhere around $740 a month. He was standing in the finance office, pen in hand, when he called Nathan, not for money advice, just to talk it through. Nathan asked the same 4-second question he always asks. Not about the car. About the 8 months from now. The coworker went quiet on the phone for a second, then said, honestly, probably not. He bought a used version of the same model instead, for years old, for $18,000 less, and put the difference into a high-yield savings account earning 4.6%. 18 months later, he still drives it. He's forgotten the exact number he saved. The account hasn't. This is where the math gets uncomfortable because it isn't really about $18,000 sitting in an account. It's about what that money would have been doing instead if it had gone toward the loan. A car payment of $740 a month, financed at close to 7%, means a large chunk of every early payment goes to interest, not the car itself. Skip the new car entirely. And that $740 a month, redirected into an index fund for even 5 years, becomes close to $54,000. Not because of some dramatic sacrifice. Because one 4-second question moved a monthly number from one column to another. The same pattern shows up around life events people don't expect. Weddings, specifically. The average American wedding this year runs somewhere close to $32,000. Almost nobody sits down and asks the 8-month question about a wedding because it doesn't feel like a purchase. It feels like a milestone, which makes it exempt from the pause. But the couples who quietly build wealth in their 30s and 40s, the ones who never bring up money at dinner, tend to be the same couples who asked exactly that question about their wedding a decade earlier. Not can we afford this, but will we care more about this day? Or about starting a marriage without a loan attached to it? Some of them spent the $32,000 anyway. Plenty didn't. The ones who didn't rarely mention it. There's no natural moment to bring up a decision you made in private for seconds long, a decade ago. Insurance shows up here too, in the opposite direction, a place where the question gets skipped for the wrong reason. People will spend 20 minutes deciding on a couch and 30 seconds deciding on health insurance during open enrollment, clicking the cheapest premium without asking whether they'd still be fine with that choice 8 months from now, mid-illness, staring at a deductible they didn't read closely. The quiet ones, the Nathans and Vivians, tend to ask the question in the direction most people skip it. Not what's cheapest today. What happens to me in 8 months if this goes wrong? Same 4 seconds. Completely different outcome when something actually does go wrong. It's not that the quiet ones are smarter about insurance forms. It's that they've built the habit of pausing before any number leaves their hands, and a health plan is just another number, dressed up as paperwork instead of a purchase. Go back to Vivian for a moment, because there's a detail from her story worth sitting with longer. $400,000. Built on a salary that never crossed $70,000. Run that forward, and it isn't really about grading papers or driving an older car. Plenty of teachers do both and retire with far less. It's that every single purchase in 3 decades passed through the same 4-second filter before it reached her wallet, and most of them quietly failed. Not because she was deprived. Because most excitement, given 8 months, evaporates on its own. And she simply waited to find out before spending instead of after. Housing is where this shows up the loudest, precisely because it happens the slowest. A house in most parts of the country right now runs somewhere between $415,000 and $430,000, with mortgage rates sitting around 6.5% to 7.2%. At those numbers, the difference between a house that's slightly too big and a house that's exactly enough isn't a feeling. It's a specific number every single month for 30 years. Nathan looked at a 4-bedroom 2 years ago. Bigger yard, extra room he didn't have a use for yet. Monthly payment about $400 higher than the 3-bedroom down the street. He asked the question, not about the house, about himself, 8 months after moving in. Alone in a room he'd filled with boxes he never unpacked. He bought the 3-bedroom. $400 a month, redirected into a retirement account instead of an empty guest room, compounding for the 28 years until he retires, turns into something closer to $430,000 by the time he's done, a number that has nothing to do with square footage and everything to do with one 4-second pause standing in a hallway he never lived in. Nobody frames a house that way when they're standing in it with a realtor and a checklist. The checklist asks about the yard, the school district, the granite countertops. It never asks the only question that actually predicts regret. Not do I want this now, but will I still want this once the newness wears off, once it's just where I live instead of where I'm choosing to live. Vivian asked that question about her own house 30 years ago, stayed in the same modest 3-bedroom the entire time her salary never crossed $70,000, and never once felt like she was missing something bigger, because she'd already answered, in advance, whether bigger would have mattered. That's really the whole mechanism laid all the way out. It isn't restraint. It isn't frugality as a personality trait. It's timing, asking one specific question before the decision instead of justifying it after. The kayak, the espresso machine, the truck, the car in the finance office, the wedding venue, the extra bedroom, different price tags, same 4 seconds, same question, asked before instead of after. Multiply that by every decision across 30 years, and the number stops being about willpower entirely. It becomes about a single habit, repeated quietly, that nobody ever noticed because it never made a sound. So here's where that leaves you. Not a new budget. Not an app. Not a spreadsheet you'll abandon in 3 weeks. Just the next time something lands in your hands, a price, a cart, a car in a showroom, a couch, a wedding venue quote. Before you decide anything, ask the one question. Not whether you can afford it, whether you'll still care in 8 months or 3 years or 5. Let the answer decide, not the moment. 4 seconds. That's the entire cost of finding out before it's too late to change anything. That's the entire difference between the people who talk about money constantly and the ones who say almost nothing, except once, at exactly the right moment, when it still matters.